An employee needed a date for Christmas. Her billionaire boss said, "Pretend I'm him." What started as pretense turned into true love, and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from. The December rain tapped against the windows of the 13th floor of the office building on Wall Street, creating a melancholic rhythm that echoed Sarah Johnson's mood. At 32, she had become an expert at making excuses to her family about her non-existent love life. Sitting at her desk as an administrative assistant at Tech Innovations, surrounded by piles of reports and the cold glow of her computer screen, she contemplated yet another lonely Christmas Eve. The office was practically empty that Friday, the day before the holiday. Only a few lights remained on in the floor, casting long shadows between the deserted workstations. The aroma of reheated coffee mingled with the artificial scent of the holiday arrangement that the company had placed in the reception. A small pine tree decorated with golden bows and twinkling lights that seemed to mock her solitude. Sarah was known for her brutal honesty and her tendency to sacrifice herself for others, traits that made her an exemplary employee but complicated her personal life. Her brown hair was pulled back into a practical bun, with a few rebellious strands escaping after a long day at work. Her hands, always busy typing or organizing documents, trembled slightly as she held the phone that had just rung. "Sarah, my daughter, you will be able to come for dinner tomorrow, right?" Her mother's voice sounded fragile through the line, laden with a hope that broke her daughter's heart. "Of course, Mom, I always will." Sarah closed her eyes, bracing herself for the question she knew was coming next. "And your boyfriend? That guy you mentioned last month, can he come too?" Sarah's stomach twisted, another lie she would have to uphold. "Oh, Mom, he's traveling with his family. You know how it is at Christmas." "I was so excited to meet him." The disappointment in Mrs. Johnson's voice was palpable. "Ever since your father and I separated, I've been imagining what it would be like to have the family together again, you know? With you happy, with someone special. My diabetes has been so out of control lately, and the doctor said that emotional stress makes everything worse." Sarah felt the familiar weight of guilt settling on her shoulders like a lead cloak. Her mother had developed diabetes after her tumultuous divorce from her father 3 years ago, and since then her health fluctuated with her emotional state. The separation had been devastating for the whole family. Her father, once a kind man, had become bitter and distant, while her mother had sunk into a deep depression. "Mom, don't worry about me. I'm fine, really." The words sounded hollow, even to her own ears. "Sarah, you're 32. Dear, I just want to see you happy with your own family. Your father may not show it, but he cares too. Just yesterday, he asked if you were seeing anyone. Dad asked about me." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. Since the separation, her father rarely showed interest in her personal life. "Yes, he did. I think if you brought someone special to dinner, it might give us all a little hope, to show that love still exists, that families can still work." Sarah swallowed hard. How could she explain to her mother that she had given up on love years ago? How could she tell her that every relationship she had tried to build had ended in disappointment, whether due to men who couldn't handle their responsibilities or her own difficulty in fully trusting someone? "Mom, I promise I'll think of something, okay? I need to hang up now. I still have work to finish." "All right, my daughter. I love you. And Sarah, thank you for always taking care of all of us." The call ended, leaving Sarah alone with the sound of the rain and the low hum of the air conditioning. She rested, her face in her hands, feeling tears of frustration burning her eyes. Why was it so hard to just be honest with her family? Why did every conversation turn into an elaborate performance to protect everyone's feelings but her own? It was then that she heard footsteps echoing down the hallway. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and pretended to be focused on the spreadsheet open on her screen. It couldn't be any of her colleagues. They had all left for their family celebrations. Only one person remained in the office at this hour. David Miller appeared at the entrance of her section, and Sarah felt that familiar, uncomfortable familiarity that always struck her in her boss's presence. At 38, he was the kind of man who commanded attention without needing to ask. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair always impeccably styled, and honey-colored eyes that seemed to see through people. His dark grey suit was slightly wrinkled after a long day of meetings, and he had loosened his tie, giving him a less formal air than usual. David was known in the market for his coldness in negotiations and his aversion to personal commitments. He had built his company from the ground up after a difficult childhood, and his dedication to work was legendary. Sarah had worked as his administrative assistant for 2 years and knew that despite his intimidating reputation, he was fair and respectful to his employees. "Sarah, are you still here?" His voice had that deep, controlled tone she knew well. "I thought everyone had already left. I'm finishing up some reports for Monday." She didn't look up from the screen, hoping he wouldn't notice her red eyes. David approached, and Marina could smell the subtle aroma of her perfume mixed with a light fragrance of coffee. He had stopped by her desk, and she finally had to look up. "Is everything okay?" There was something different in his voice, a softness that rarely surfaced during work hours. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" Marina forced a smile that she knew wasn't convincing. David studied her for a moment, his golden eyes noticing details she preferred to hide. "You seem worried, and your eyes are red." "It's just tiredness." Marina looked back at the screen, wishing he would just leave. The last thing she needed was for her boss to see her in a moment of vulnerability. "Marina." His voice had become even softer, almost gentle. "Sorry to intrude, but I overheard part of the phone conversation when I was passing by the hallway. It wasn't intentional, but it sounded like you were having a tough conversation." Marina felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "You heard?" "Enough to realize that you're dealing with family pressure about relationships." David pulled a chair and sat next to her desk, a surprisingly informal gesture from him. "Look, I know it's none of my business, but no, it really isn't." The words came out harsher than Marina intended. Embarrassment was turning into irritation. "Sorry, I didn't mean to be rude. It's complicated." "I understand." David fell silent for a moment, seeming to ponder something. When he spoke again, there was a strange determination in his voice. "What if I offered a solution?" Marina finally looked at him fully, confused. "What do you mean?" "You need a date for your family's Christmas dinner. I'm free tomorrow night." His words were said so casually that Marina needed a few seconds to process what he had suggested. "You are offering to pretend to be my boyfriend?" Marina felt like she must be dreaming. David Miller, the billionaire businessman known for avoiding any kind of personal commitment, was offering to participate in a family charade? "Why not?" He shrugged, as if he were offering to review a contract. "You need help. I have free time. It's a win-win situation." "Win-win?" Marina stared at him, skeptical. "And what do you gain from this?" For a brief moment, something indefinable passed through David's eyes, a shadow of old pain that vanished so quickly that Marina almost believed she had imagined it. "Let's just say I understand family pressure, and, well, maybe it's in time to do something that doesn't involve spreadsheets and board meetings." Marina hesitated, her instinct telling her there was more to his offer than met the eye. But the memory of her mother's fragile voice still echoed in her ears, mixed with the image of her father asking about her personal life for the first time in years. "This is crazy," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Maybe," David agreed, a half-smile appearing on his lips. "But sometimes the best solutions are the ones that seem the most unlikely. What do you say?" Marina looked out the window, where the rain continued to fall over the city, lit by Christmas lights. Somewhere in Springfield, her mother was probably preparing the house for yet another dinner, where everyone would pretend the family hadn't fallen apart. Maybe it was time for a lie to serve, to build, rather than just protect. "All right," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you have no idea what you're getting into." David's smile widened, and for a moment Marina saw a spark of something she couldn't identify in his eyes. "Trust me, Marina, I know exactly what I'm doing." As the rain continued to patter against the windows and the city lights flickered like distant stars, neither of them could imagine that this impulsive decision would change their lives in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. The Christmas dinner at Mrs. Johnson's house in Springfield exceeded all of Marina's expectations. The modest residence, with its 3 bedrooms and small backyard, had been decorated with the same care as always. Colourful lights in the living room window, a nativity scene set up on the TV stand, and the unmistakable aroma of roasting turkey mixed with cinnamon and cloves. Marina had been nervous. Since David rang the doorbell at exactly 7 o'clock, bringing a bouquet of wildflowers and a bottle of red wine that cost more than her weekly salary. He had swapped his business suit for a light blue dress shirt and black dress pants, stylish without being ostentatious, a choice that demonstrated his social intelligence. "Mum, this is David," Marina had said, feeling her heart race as her mother appeared at the door with eyes shining with curiosity and hope. Mrs. Johnson, a 55-year-old woman with neatly styled grey hair and hands that told the story of years caring for the family, welcomed David with a smile Marina hadn't seen in months. She wore her favourite navy blue dress, the one she saved for special occasions, and had lightly made up. Signs that she was genuinely excited to meet her daughter's supposed boyfriend. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Johnson. Marina talks so much about you that I feel like I already know you," David said, politely kissing the older woman's hand. "Oh, what a polite young man." Mrs. Johnson blushed like a teenager. "And what beautiful flowers. Marina, you didn't tell me he was so charming." During dinner, David displayed a surprisingly natural demeanor. He sincerely complimented the home's decor, asked interested questions about family recipes, and even managed to elicit smiles from Marina's father, Mr. Johnson, a 60-year-old man who had become taciturn after the divorce. "So, David, Marina told me you work with technology," Mr. Johnson had commented while slicing generous pieces of the golden turkey that Mrs. Johnson had prepared. "Yes, sir. We have a company that develops software solutions for other businesses. It's a growing market in the United States." David spoke with genuine passion about his work, and Sarah noticed how his eyes lit up when discussing innovation and technology. "That must pay quite well, right?" Her father's direct question made Sarah shrink in embarrassment, but David just smiled. "It allows for a comfortable living, yes. But what I enjoy most is the challenge of solving complex problems. It's like a giant puzzle where each piece needs to fit perfectly." "And how did you two meet?" Mrs. Johnson asked, while serving the seasoned stuffing with bacon and raisins, her special recipe. Sarah and David exchanged a quick glance. They had agreed on a story during the car ride, but she still felt the nervousness tighten her stomach. "It was at a cafe on Wall Street," David replied softly, his voice filled with a tenderness that almost convinced Sarah herself. "I was waiting in line when she bumped into me, spilled coffee on my shirt, and was so mortified that she insisted on paying for the dry cleaning. I was late for a meeting," Sarah continued, slipping into the role with a surprising ease. "He was so understanding that we ended up talking. One thing led to another, and..." And I discovered I had found the most interesting person in New York, David finished, covering Sarah's hand with his in a gesture of affection that made her heart race in a completely real way. Mrs. Johnson practically melted. "Oh, how lovely! Mr. Johnson, did you hear that? How romantic!" Even Mr. Johnson seemed touched by the story. "It's good to see my daughter happy," he murmured, and Sarah felt tears burning her eyes as she realized it had been years since she had heard her father speak of her with such warmth. The evening passed like a dream. David helped serve the traditional French toast for dessert, patiently listened to Sarah's childhood stories told by her mother, and even joined in on the family's inside jokes. When Mrs. Johnson showed old photo albums, he expressed genuine interest, making affectionate comments about pictures of young Sarah. "She was always so stubborn," Mrs. Johnson laughed, pointing to a photo of Sarah at 6 years old with her arms crossed and a determined expression. "When she decided on something, there was no force in the world that could change her mind." "Some things never change," David said, looking at Sarah with a smile that made butterflies dance in her stomach. When they finally said their goodbyes, it was past midnight. Mrs. Johnson hugged David as if he were her son, whispering in his ear, "Thank you for making my daughter smile again." In the car, during the drive back to Brooklyn, a comfortable silence settled between them. Sarah watched the city lights through the window, still processing how easily they had portrayed a loving couple. "You were amazing," she finally said. "Thank you. I didn't expect you to be so natural with them." "Your family is special," David replied, keeping his eyes on the road. "Your mother has a huge heart, and your father, he just needs reasons to smile again." "He wasn't like this before," Sarah explained. "The separation was really hard for him. I think he blames himself for not being able to keep the family together." "And you blame yourself for not being able to fix everything on your own," David observed gently. Sarah looked at him, surprised by his insight. "How do you know?" "I recognize the signs. I've carried that weight too." They were arriving at Sarah's apartment in Brooklyn when her phone rang. It was her mother. "Sarah, I forgot to tell you some news. Your father and I were talking, and we decided we want to get to know David better. How about we visit you next weekend? We can have lunch together, see where you live." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Mom, I don't know if... Oh, sweetheart, do you think David would mind? I was so happy today. I felt like our family was complete again. Your father even said he wants to talk more with him about business. It's been so long since I've seen your father interested in anything." Sarah looked at David in panic, but he just nodded, indicating that he would go along with the charade. "Of course, Mom. It will be great," Sarah heard her own voice say. After she hung up, she turned to David. "Do you realize this is getting out of control? Now they want to visit us. We're going to have to create a whole story about where we live, our habits." "We can do this," David said calmly. "Let's meet during the week to align our story. Morning coffee, lunches. We'll do this right." "Why are you doing this?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Seriously, David, why are you willing to complicate your life for an employee you barely know?" David turned off the car engine and sat in silence for a long moment, looking through the windshield at the simple building where Sarah lived. "My mother begged my father to come back for years," he finally said, his voice low and heavy with old pain. "I was a child and heard her crying on the phone, using the same desperate tone you used yesterday at the office. I could never help her. Maybe this is my chance to make a difference for someone." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "David, I'm so sorry." "Don't be. Just let's make this work, okay? Your family deserves to be happy, even if it's based on a temporary lie. As Sarah walked up to her apartment, she couldn't shake the vulnerable expression she had seen on David's face. There was more depth to that man than she had ever imagined, and it scared her as much as it attracted her. The next day, during breakfast at a bakery in Pinheiros, they began to build their fictitious story. David had an apartment in Manhattan. She could say that she had recently moved there. They met regularly for dinner on weekends. He enjoyed thriller movies while she preferred romantic comedies, a detail that made them laugh when they realized they truly had opposite tastes. "We need a song," David said while nibbling on a piece of toasted bread. "Couples always have a special song." "Evidence," Sarah suggested. "Every Brazilian couple has a story with that song." "Too cliché," David laughed. "How about Every Time I Say Goodbye by Tom Jobim?" Sarah stared at him impressed. "You like bossa nova?" "My mother listened to it a lot when I was a kid. It's one of the few good memories I have of her. It was at that moment that Sarah realized how little she knew about the man sitting across from her. David Miller, the cold and calculating businessman, was also a man who held memories of his mother through music and was willing to pretend to be in a relationship to help an employee make her family happy. "David," she said softly, "you need to know that I have a daughter." His fork stopped midway to his mouth. "What do you mean?" "Her name is Sophia. She's 8 years old. She lives with me." Sarah took a deep breath. "I never mentioned it at work. Because, well, you know how the market treats single mothers. But if my parents are going to visit us, they will want to see her too." David was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Sarah braced herself to see him back out of the charade, retracting his offer. "What about her father?" he finally asked. "He hasn't been part of her life since she was 2. When he realized that being a father required more than he was willing to give, he simply disappeared." "And you've raised her alone since then?" "With my mother's help, yes. That's why it's so important to me that my family is happy. Sophia loves her grandparents, and they are the only family she really knows." David nodded slowly. "Then let's meet Sophia too. If we're going to do this, let's do it right." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. "Are you sure? One thing is pretending to be my boyfriend. Another is pretending to be a stepfather to an 8-year-old. "Sarah," David looked directly at her, "I promise to help your family be happy. That includes Sophia." At that moment, sitting in a simple bakery in Brooklyn, listening to the morning traffic of New York City, and seeing the determination in David's golden eyes, Sarah realized she had completely underestimated the consequences of accepting his help. What had started as a simple lie was becoming something much more complex and dangerous for her heart. February arrived with the typical heat of summer and the contagious excitement of carnival. The streets of New York City filled with parades, golden confetti, and the pulsating sound of drums echoing from Brooklyn to downtown. Sarah had never imagined she would spend Carnival pretending to be her boss's girlfriend, much less that this charade would involve her 8-year-old daughter. Sophia Johnson was a perceptive child with the same brown hair as her mother, but with bright, dark eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. She had studied David with the seriousness of a detective when he showed up for the first official date at Sarah's apartment in Brooklyn. The 2-bedroom apartment was simple but cozy, decorated with furniture that Sarah had gradually bought over the years. The living room walls were painted light beige, with a few plants she tended to on weekends, and drawings by Sophia stuck to the fridge in the American-style kitchen. The girls' room was a universe of its own, with a house-shaped bed, shelves full of books, and a desk where she did her homework religiously. "So, you are my mom's boyfriend?" Sophia asked directly, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of orange juice, observing David with analytical eyes. "I am," David replied, settling into the chair next to the girl with a naturalness that surprised Sarah. "And you must be the famous Sophia that your mom always mentions." "My mom talks about me." Sophia seemed genuinely surprised. "She never told me she talked about me. At work." Sarah felt a pang in her chest. It was true. She always avoided mentioning Sophia at the office, fearing it would hurt her professional image. Another unintended consequence of her self-protective choices. "She talks a lot," David gently lied. "She told me that you are the best in your class at math and that you love to draw." Sophia's eyes lit up. "Do you want to see my drawings?" The next afternoon, while Sarah prepared a snack in the kitchen, she watched from Sophia's bedroom window as David crouched beside the girl's bed, genuinely interested in each. Drawings stuck to the wall. Sophia excitedly explained her creations: a family of colorful cats, a tree house, a castle with princesses saving dragons instead of the other way around. "This here is me and Mom." Sophia pointed to a drawing where two stick figures smiled hand in hand under a bright yellow sun. "Mom works a lot, but she always helps me with my homework." "And where is your dad in this drawing?" David asked gently. Sophia shrugged with the typical nonchalance of children. "There's no dad. It's just me and Mom. Sometimes Grandpa John and Grandma Johnson come over for dinner with us." Sarah saw David nod in understanding, not asking any more questions about the absent father. There was a delicacy in his approach that touched her heart deeply. On Carnival Saturday, the three joined Mrs. Johnson and John at the Cordon de Villa Madalena. The parade was in full swing, with hundreds of people in costumes dancing through the streets to the sound of drums. Sarah wore a simple pirate costume, a colorful skirt, a white blouse and a bandana, while David opted for a Hawaiian shirt and a Panama hat. Sophia was radiant. In her butterfly costume, the iridescent wings shimmering under the afternoon sun. "Mum, why have you never told me that David likes the same cartoons I do?" Sophia asked as they stopped to buy water at a stall, decorated with streamers. Sarah almost choked on her water. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "He knows all the characters from Teen Titans Go. And did you know that Beast Boy overcame his fear of water in last year's episode?" Sophia spoke excitedly, fluttering her costume wings. Sarah looked at David, who was chatting with Mr. Johnson about investment strategies while sipping a mojito. How did he know so much about children's cartoons? When did he have time to research Sophia's interests? "Sophia," Sarah knelt to be at her daughter's height, "can I ask you a question? What do you think of David?" The girl paused for a moment, observing David, who was now helping Mrs. Johnson shield herself from the sun with an improvised umbrella. "He's nice," she finally said. But what? Why don't you two kiss?" Sophia's direct question made Sarah blush furiously. "At school, Fernanda said that boyfriends are always kissing, but you two just hold hands." Sarah felt panic rise in her throat. How to explain to an 8-year-old the complexities of a fake relationship? "Sweetheart, every couple has their own way of showing affection," she said, trying to sound natural. "Not all boyfriends kiss in public." "Oh," Sophia seemed to accept the explanation. "Like Aunt Marcia and Uncle Carlos, who only hug in front of the kids." "Exactly." But Sarah noticed that Sophia continued to observe their behavior for the rest of the afternoon with the detailed attention of a little investigator. The situation became even more complicated on Monday when Helen Roberts, David's personal assistant for 15 years, appeared at the office with a grim expression. Helen was a 45-year-old woman with grey hair always tied in a neat bun, discreet glasses, and a legendary efficiency that made her practically indispensable to the company's operation. "Sarah, can I talk to you?" Helen approached Sarah's desk with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Helen. What do you need?" "It's about David. I've noticed some changes in his behavior lately. He's been more distracted, altered his personal schedule without consulting me, and yesterday I saw him talking to you about matters that clearly weren't professional. Helen sat in a nearby chair, lowering her voice. Are you two dating? Sarah felt her blood run cold. Helen was known for her extreme loyalty to David, whom she had treated like a son since he was a young entrepreneur struggling to establish the company. If she suspected anything irregular, I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah tried to keep her voice steady. Sarah, I've worked with David for 15 years. I know all his habits, moods, and mannerisms. In recent weeks, he's changed, and coincidentally, you also seem different, more lively. Maybe you're imagining things. Helen studied her with experienced eyes. Sarah, you seem like a good person, and I know you're a competent employee, but I need you to understand. David built this company with a lot of sacrifice. He can't afford to have his reputation tarnished by inappropriate relationships in the workplace. The veiled threat in Helen's voice was unmistakable. Sarah felt a knot in her stomach, realizing that her charade could have professional consequences she hadn't considered. I understand your concern, Helen, but I assure you that nothing inappropriate is happening. I hope you're being honest. Helen stood up. Because if I find out that something detrimental to David's interests is happening, I will take all necessary measures to protect him. That night, Sarah called David as soon as she got home, recounting the conversation with Helen. Sophia was in her room doing homework, so she could speak freely. She suspects something, Sarah said, pacing nervously around the living room. David, maybe we should stop this before it causes problems for you at work. Don't worry about Helen, David replied. She's overprotective, but she'll understand eventually. You don't understand. She could create serious problems. And there's another thing. Sarah hesitated before continuing. Sophia is asking questions. She noticed that our relationship doesn't seem real. There was silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean? She asked why we don't kiss. David, kids are more observant than we think. If we're not more convincing, she might end up telling my parents something unintentionally. I understand, David said thoughtfully. So maybe we need to adjust our performance. Adjust how? Be more physically convincing. Public displays of affection. Maybe some kisses when there's an audience. Sarah felt butterflies dance in her stomach just thinking about the possibility. David, are you sure? This could complicate things between us. Sarah, we're already pretending to be a couple. How could it get more complicated? The following Thursday, during lunch at the mall at Short Hills, where they had agreed to meet to keep up appearances, the first complication arose unexpectedly. They were sitting at an outdoor table at an Italian restaurant, sharing a pepperoni pizza and discussing work when Sarah saw a familiar figure approaching. Sarah, what a coincidence! Carla, an old college friend, approached the table with a curious smile. And you must be the mysterious boyfriend. Sarah never posts pictures of you on Instagram. Sarah forced a smile as she introduced David, who politely stood up to greet Carla. During the ensuing conversation, Carla asked several questions about how they met, how long they had been together, and if they had plans. Wedding. We prefer to keep our private life to ourselves, David said softly, wrapping his arm around Sarah's shoulders in a gesture that felt completely natural. How sweet. You two are very discreet. Sarah has always been like that, right? A bit closed off to relationships. Carla laughed. I remember in college she said she would never fall in love for real. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. Those were intimate conversations she had with Carla years ago, when she still believed that protecting her heart was more important than opening it up to someone. People change, David said, looking directly into Sarah's eyes. Sometimes we meet someone who makes us rethink all our certainties. The intensity in his voice made Sarah wonder if he was just acting or if there was something more behind those words. After Carla said her goodbyes, they sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of the performance still hanging between them. "I'm sorry," Sarah finally said. "Carla has always been very curious. I hope it wasn't uncomfortable." "It wasn't," David replied, "but it made me think we're creating a very elaborate story. Maybe it's time to prepare for the long-term consequences." "What consequences?" David looked her straight in the eye. "What if our families decide they like seeing us together so much that they start pushing for engagement, marriage, grandkids?" Sarah hadn't thought about that. In her mind, the charade was temporary, just enough to get through her family's difficult period. But what if they created expectations that they couldn't fulfill without deeply hurting the people they loved? "We can deal with that when the time comes," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Sarah," David took her hand across the table, "there's something I need to tell you about why I really agreed to do this." But before he could continue, Sarah's phone rang. It was Mrs. Johnson, and her voice sounded strange, fragile and worried. "Sarah, dear, I need to tell you something. It's about you and David." "Well, I always knew." Sarah felt the world spin around her. "What do you mean, Mum?" "I always knew you were pretending, sweetheart. Since the first dinner, a mother notices these things, but I pretended to believe it because it had been so long since I saw hope in your father's eyes. Seeing you two together, even if it was a lie, gave us strength to imagine that families can still be happy." Sarah looked at David in panic, seeing her own shock reflected in his golden eyes. Her mother had known all along, and worse, she had pretended to believe the lie to protect the family's feelings, just as Sarah had done years ago. The irony was painful and perfect. They had spent months pretending to each other, both trying to protect the family's feelings through well-intentioned lies. March arrived with a subtle change in the climate of New York City. The cool autumn mornings began to replace the stifling summer heat, and the leaves of the city's trees gradually changed color. However, at the Tech Innovations office, the atmosphere was far from serene. Helen had escalated her investigations, and rumors about the relationship between Sarah and David began to circulate through the company's hallways like an electric current. Sarah arrived on the first Monday of March to find curious glances and whispers that abruptly ceased when she walked by. Her desk, located in the administrative section near the elevators, had become an unofficial observation point where colleagues pretended to look for documents just to try to catch conversations between her and David. "Good morning, Sarah," greeted Juliana from accounting, with a smile that seemed overly rehearsed. "I saw you and David at the mall at Short Hills last week. You make a lovely couple." Sarah forced a smile as she turned on her computer. "Thank you, Juliana. It must be interesting dating the boss, right?" The question came with a look full of implications. "I imagine it makes some things easier around here." Sarah's blood boiled. That was exactly what she had always feared, being seen as someone who used personal relationships to advance professionally. "My work and my personal life are completely separate," she replied dryly. Of course, Juliana laughed unconvincingly before walking away. The day worsened when Sarah discovered she had been excluded from an important meeting about the company's new project. Carlos, the operations manager, explained with evident embarrassment that the decision had come from above. "It's nothing personal, Sarah. It's just that, well, with all this situation regarding your relationship, they thought it best to avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest." Sarah felt a mix of anger and humiliation burning in her chest. She had been working at Tech Innovations for 2 years, always recognized for her competence and dedication, and now she was being marginalized because of a relationship that didn't even exist. During lunch, she retreated to the small indoor garden of the building, a green space surrounded by glass where some employees went to relax. She was nibbling on a sandwich when David appeared, bringing 2 cups of coffee. "I heard about the meeting," he said, sitting next to her on the wooden bench. "I've already spoken to Carlos. You'll be in the next one." "David, this is getting out of hand." Sarah accepted the coffee, feeling the familiar aroma slightly calm her nerves. "I'm being treated like an opportunist who takes advantage of a relationship with the boss. My professional reputation is being destroyed. This will pass. People will get used to it." "And what if they don't get used to it? What if this permanently harms my career?" Sarah stared at him. "You can afford to have a controversial relationship. You're the owner of the company. I'm just an easily replaceable employee." David fell silent for a moment, watching a yellow butterfly land on a nearby rosebush. "You are not easily replaceable, Sarah. Not to me." There was something in his voice that made her heart. Marina forced herself to stay focused on the practical situation. "Maybe we should start planning the end of the charade," she said reluctantly. "Invent a friendly separation. Give things some time to cool off." "And your family? Your mother was doing much better the last time I saw her." It was true. Since Christmas, Mrs. Johnson seemed revitalized. Her blood sugar levels had stabilized, she was back to cooking with joy, and even Mr. Johnson had shown renewed interest in life. He had mentioned the previous week that he was considering going back to work part-time. "I know, but I can't maintain this indefinitely if it's harming my career." David turned to face her completely. "What if I could guarantee that this won't harm your career? In fact, what if it could improve it?" "How?" "There's a new position we're creating, Special Projects Coordinator, 40% higher salary, your own office, a subordinate team. You would be perfect for the role." Marina felt distrust and hope battling in her chest. "David, you can't promote me now. That will only confirm everyone's suspicions. The promotion would be strictly based on your merit. I have 2 years of impeccable evaluations to prove it. Even so, no one will believe that. Then let's prove them wrong. You'll be the best Special Projects Coordinator this company has ever had." That afternoon, a new complication arose when Helen appeared in the office, accompanied by an elegant woman Marina didn't recognize. The stranger was tall, slim, with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that screamed discreet wealth, a tailored white blazer, nude high heels, and a handbag that cost more than Marina's monthly salary. "Marina, this is Isabella Watson," Helen introduced with a cold smile. "She just returned from a 2-year stint coordinating our branch in Miami." Marina stood up to greet the woman, immediately noticing how Isabella assessed her from head to toe with calculating eyes. "Nice to meet you," Isabella said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I heard you're the administrative assistant who's causing such a stir." The condescending tone made Marina stiffen. "I am the administrative assistant, yes, for 2 years. How interesting. It must be exciting to work so closely with David." Isabella's smile was sharp as a blade. "We have a long history, you know. We founded the company together before he decided to expand into other markets." Helen watched the interaction with barely concealed satisfaction. Isabella was a minority partner before accepting the challenge of coordinating our international expansion. Now she's back to reclaim some responsibilities. "And where's David?" Isabella asked, looking around as if she owned the place. "I'd like to surprise him." At that moment, David emerged from a meeting, accompanied by 2 clients. Marina saw his expression subtly change when he noticed Isabella's presence. First surprise, then something she couldn't identify. "Isabella," his voice was carefully controlled, "I didn't expect you back so soon." We decided to wrap up the Miami project earlier than planned. I missed home. Isabella approached and kissed David's cheek in a way that lasted a few seconds longer than socially appropriate. Marina watched the interaction, feeling something unpleasant twist in her stomach. Jealousy? That was ridiculous. David wasn't really her boyfriend. We need to talk, Isabella continued, about the future of the company and other things. Sure. Helen, can you schedule a meeting for tomorrow? Actually, Isabella smiled, I was thinking of something more informal. How about dinner tonight? That Japanese restaurant we used to frequent. Marina saw David hesitate, his eyes meeting hers for a moment. Isabella, things have changed since you left. I'm committed now. Oh, yes, the administrative assistant. Isabella looked at Marina with a smile that didn't hide her competitiveness. How romantic. But I'm sure Marina understands that business is business, right? Marina felt all eyes turn to her. Helen watched with barely concealed interest, waiting to see how she would react. The other employees nearby pretended to work, while obviously paying attention to the conversation. Of course, Marina replied, forcing a smile. David is free to have business meetings when necessary. Perfect. Isabella seemed satisfied with the response. David, I'll pick you up at 8. After Isabella left to revisit other departments in the company, Marina returned to her desk, trying to process what had just happened. Helen approached with an expression that mixed satisfaction and false concern. Isabella has always been very determined, Helen commented casually. She and David had a very special partnership, personal and professional, if you know what I mean. Marina didn't respond, focusing intently on the spreadsheet open on her screen. It must be hard to compete with someone who has known David for so long, someone who helped build all of this with him. Helen gestured broadly around the office, but I'm sure you understand that the company's interests always come first for David. That night, Marina was helping Sophia with her math homework when her phone rang. It was a message from David. Dinner cancelled. We need to talk tomorrow. She stared at the message, trying to decipher what it could mean. Had he cancelled dinner with Isabella? Why? Mum, are you okay? Sophia looked at her with concern. You look upset. I'm fine, sweetheart, just thinking about work. Is it because of David? Did you two fight? Sophia's direct question caught her off guard. Why do you ask that? Because you get weird when you talk about him, and he gets weird when he talks about you. It's like you two are hiding something. Marina felt her heart race. Sophia was more perceptive than she had imagined. Sometimes adults have complicated problems, sweetheart, but this has nothing to do with you. I like him, Sophia said simply. He taught me how to make paper airplanes that fly super far, and he knows all the fun facts about dinosaurs. Do you really like him? Sarah was surprised by the intensity of the relief she felt. I do. He's kind, and he makes you smile. Sophia hesitated before continuing. Mum, if you two don't stay together, can he still come visit me? As a friend? The innocent question broke Sarah's heart. Sophia had genuinely grown attached to David, creating bonds that would make the eventual end of the charade even more painful. Will is he, sweetheart. Now let's finish this lesson. But as she helped Sophia with division problems, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the complex situation she had gotten herself into. Her career was at risk. Her daughter was getting attached to a man who didn't really belong in their lives, and now a beautiful and sophisticated former partner had returned with clearly romantic intentions. And the most confusing part of all? Sarah realized that the idea of David having dinner with Isabella bothered her much more than it should have for someone pretending to be in a relationship. Perhaps the lines between pretense and reality were blurring more than she wanted to admit, and this could be the most dangerous complication of all. April brought with it the golden autumn of Springfield, and an unexpected proposal that would change the dynamic between Sarah and David. During a board meeting, Tech Innovations decided to organize a charity fall festival at East Side Community School, located in the outskirts of the city. The event would be fully sponsored by the company and open to the entire local community. Sarah was in the meeting room when David presented the idea to the executives, explaining that the social initiative was part of the company's new corporate responsibility strategy. Isabella, who now occupied an office on the same floor as the executives, questioned the financial return of the initiative with her melodious voice and Americanized accent acquired during her years in Miami. "I understand the importance of social initiatives, David, but we need to measure the real impact on our brand indicators," she said, elegantly flipping through a state-of-the-art tablet. "Is there a structured marketing strategy for this initiative?" "The goal isn't marketing, Isabella," David replied patiently. "It's genuine social responsibility. We want to give back to the community that has given us opportunities." Sarah observed their interaction, noting how Isabella always found subtle ways to question David's decisions, creating a constant tension that affected the entire corporate environment. Since her return, the blonde had implemented small changes in the company, altered meeting times, new bureaucratic procedures, hiring external consultants, always with impeccable technical justifications, but somehow undermining David's authority. "I would like to coordinate the event," Sarah spoke up, surprising herself with her courage. "I grew up in a similar community in Springfield. I understand the needs and culture of the locals." The silence in the room was palpable. All eyes turned to her, some surprised, others clearly skeptical. Helen, sitting next to Isabella, raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow in a barely concealed expression of disapproval. "Sarah, do you have experience coordinating events of this scale?" Carlos, the operations manager, asked, sounding more like he was challenging her than genuinely inquiring. "Not corporate events," Sarah admitted honestly. "But I helped organize several parties in the community where I grew up. I know how to mobilize volunteers, negotiate with local suppliers, and understand the real needs of families." Isabella leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand in a studied, casual gesture. "It's a significant responsibility, Sarah. We will be representing Tech Innovations' image to an entire community. A mistake could affect our corporate reputation." "I completely understand." Sarah kept her voice steady, even though she felt butterflies dancing in her stomach. "And that's exactly why I believe I can contribute. It's not just about organizing an event, but about creating a genuine connection with the community." David watched her silently for a few seconds, and Sarah saw something ignite in his golden eyes. Perhaps admiration, perhaps renewed interest. "Sarah's proposal makes sense," he finally said. "Let's give her the necessary resources and team support." 2 weeks later, Sarah was standing in the schoolyard at Eastside, coordinating the setup of colorful booths while volunteers from Tech Innovations and local residents worked side by side. The contrast between the two worlds was evident. Executives in expensive suits learning to assemble wooden structures, while community kids taught administrative staff traditional games. The school was a simple building made of exposed bricks with 2 cracked cement playgrounds and a green area where some century-old trees provided generous shade. The classrooms had walls painted in vibrant colors and drawings made by the students themselves, creating a welcoming environment despite the simplicity of the facilities. Sarah wore a denim skirt, a white blouse, and comfortable sneakers, having completely abandoned the formality of the office. Her hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and she coordinated activities with a naturalness that even impressed the most skeptical colleagues. "Sarah, where do you want the booth for the secret admirer?" Jake from the IT department asked, holding a wooden structure decorated with red and pink crepe paper hearts. "Right near the main entrance," she indicated, checking the task list in her notebook. "That way, people can send notes as soon as they arrive." David appeared carrying boxes of decorations, and Sarah felt that familiar, unsettling familiarity that always hit her when she saw him outside the formal office environment. He had swapped his suit for dark jeans and a navy polo shirt that accentuated his golden eyes. His sleeves were rolled up, and there was a yellow paint stain on his forearm, a result of helping to paint the signs for the booths. "How's it going?" he asked, placing the boxes on the ground near the fishing booth. "Better than I expected," Sarah smiled genuinely. "The company volunteers are getting along well with the community, and the kids loved the idea of the fishing booth." Educational awards. During the conversation, Sophia came running across the yard, wearing a yellow flared skirt with ruffles and a checkered blouse, a festive outfit that Sarah had sewn especially for the occasion. The girl was radiant, with flushed cheeks from excitement and colorful ribbons in her braided hair. "Mom, David, come see the spiced cider booth that Mrs. Smith set up." Sophia grabbed both of their hands, pulling them toward an improvised booth where an elderly lady was stirring a steaming pot. Mrs. Smith was a woman in her 60s, with grey hair tied up in a floral scarf and calloused hands that told the story of a lifetime of hard work. She had volunteered to prepare traditional spiced cider for the event, using a family recipe that included fresh ginger, cinnamon sticks, and artisanal apple brandy. "Try it," she offered 2 steaming enamel mugs. "It's my grandmother's recipe, which she learned from her grandmother." David tasted the spiced cider and closed his eyes with a look of genuine appreciation. "It's amazing, Mrs. Smith. How long have you been making this recipe?" "Oh, my dear, since I was a girl. My mother always said the secret is in the cooking time and the love you put into it." She smiled, watching Sophia play with other nearby children. "Your little girl is a sweetheart. You make a lovely family." Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but before she could correct the misunderstanding, David responded naturally, "Thank you. We feel blessed." During the afternoon, while organizing the distribution of prizes for the fishing game, Sarah observed David interacting with the community's children. He had knelt beside a boy of about 6 who was unsuccessfully trying to fish, patiently explaining the proper technique to catch the little plastic fish. "Like this, slowly." David gently guided the boy's hand. No need to rush. When the boy finally managed to catch a fish, his eyes lit up with joy. "I did it! I did it!" "You sure did! Now you can choose a prize." David smiled, pointing to the table filled with children's books, educational games, and school supplies. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest as she witnessed the scene. There was a natural kindness in David that she had never noticed in the corporate environment, a genuine patience and affection that completely contrasted with his reputation as a cold and calculating businessman. "He's special, isn't he?" Mrs. Smith approached, following Sarah's gaze. "It's not common to find men who know how to handle children like that naturally." "Yes," Sarah murmured, still watching David, who was now helping Sophia decorate her fishing catch with pink crepe paper. "Have you been together long?" "A few months," Sarah replied automatically, maintaining the story they had built. "You can tell he loves both of you very much. A man in love has a special way of looking." Mrs. Smith smiled wisely, "and the little girl adores him. Children don't lie about these things." That afternoon, a small revelation changed Sarah's perception of her own childhood. while organizing traditional games, sack race, musical chairs, square dance, a lady approached her with a look of recognition. "Aren't you Sarah Johnson, daughter of Mrs. Johnson?" Sarah looked at the woman more closely. Grey hair, kind eyes, and a familiar smile. "I'm sorry, I don't remember. I'm Mrs. Davis, your mother's neighbor when you lived in Maplewood. You were just a little girl, about 5 or 6. Maplewood. Sarah felt a strange pang upon hearing the name of the neighborhood where she had lived in early childhood before the family moved to Springfield. It was a hazy period in her memories, filled with gaps she had always attributed to her young age. "Mrs. Davis, wow, it's been so long." Sarah smiled, although she still couldn't clearly remember the woman. "You look just like your mother, only more mischievous," Mrs. Davis laughed. "Always asking about your father, poor thing. Your mother suffered a lot back then." "Asking about my father?" Sarah frowned. "But my father was always around." Mrs. Davis seemed to realize she had said something inappropriate. "Oh, I must be confusing you with another child. Memory sometimes plays tricks on us." But the discomfort in Mrs. Davis's voice was evident, and Sarah felt that something important was being hidden. Before she could ask more questions, Sophia appeared, pulling David by the hand. "Mom, come dance the square dance with us. David doesn't know the steps right." During the square dance, while dancing to the sound of the accordion player hired for the event, Sarah couldn't shake off the conversation with Mrs. Davis. Why had she mentioned questions about her father? Mr. Johnson had always been present in her childhood, at least in the memories she held. "You're quiet," David observed during a dance break, offering her a glass of soda. "Just tired," she lied. "Sarah," Sophia tugged at her mother's shirt, "can I sleep at Grandma Johnson's house tonight? She said she could pick me up and take me to school tomorrow." Sarah looked around, searching for her mother, and found her chatting animatedly with other ladies near the bingo booth. Mrs. Johnson was wearing a yellow patterned dress and seemed more cheerful than Sarah had seen her in months. "Sure, sweetheart, but behave." After Sophia left, David offered Sarah a ride home, and during the drive back to the city, she finally voiced her concerns about the conversation with Mrs. Davis. "She said some strange things about my childhood," Sarah commented, watching the city lights through the car window. "About me asking about my father when I was little. It doesn't make sense." Maybe she was really confusing you with another child. Maybe. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there were important gaps in her childhood memories, missing pieces that could explain a lot about her family's dynamics. That night, alone in her apartment without Sophia, Sarah decided to call her mother and ask some direct questions. "Mom, I ran into Mrs. Davis. Mrs. Davis today, remember her? From Maplewood." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Mrs. Johnson responded. "Mrs. Davis. Wow, it's been so long. How is she?" "Well, Mom, she mentioned some things about my childhood that left me confused. About me asking for Dad when I was little. Why would I ask for Dad if he's always been with us?" Another pause, even longer. Sarah could hear her mother breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "Sarah, my daughter, maybe it's time we talked about some things. In person. Can you come here tomorrow?" "Mom, is everything okay? You're scaring me." "Everything's fine, dear. It's just there are some things about our family that you might have the right to know now that you're an adult." After hanging up, Sarah stayed awake late, looking out the window of her apartment at the city lights and trying to access buried memories from her early childhood. There was something important that her family had hidden from her, and she had the disturbing feeling that this revelation would fundamentally change her understanding of who she was and where she came from. And for some reason she couldn't explain, her first impulse was to call David and share her concerns. When she realized this, Sarah understood how dangerously thin the lines between pretense and reality had become. May arrived with chilly mornings and sunny afternoons, typical of autumn in New York, creating an atmosphere of instability that perfectly mirrored Sarah's emotional state. The meeting with her mother had been postponed twice. First, because Mrs. Johnson had a hypertension crisis that sent her to the emergency room. Then, because Sophia caught a bad flu that required intensive care. At the office, tension was rising daily. Isabella had established herself as a disruptive force, questioning decisions, reorganizing processes, and creating strategic alliances with board members. Her elegant and sophisticated presence deliberately contrasted with Sarah's simplicity, making her feel increasingly out of place in the corporate environment. "Sarah, can we talk?" Helen appeared at her desk on a rainy Thursday in May, carrying a folder of documents and an expression that didn't bode well. They headed to a small meeting room at the end of the hall, a neutral space with white walls, a glass table, and 2 chairs that always made Sarah feel like she was being interrogated. The rain drummed against the room's single window, creating a hypnotic rhythm that contrasted with the growing tension in the air. "I need to be direct with you," Helen began, opening the folder and pulling out several printed sheets. "I have evidence that your relationship with David is not what it appears to be." Sarah felt her blood run cold, but maintained a neutral expression. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Photographs, Sarah. You two in public situations that look more like performances than natural moments." Helen spread the photos across the table, images captured during Christmas, at the mall, at a summer festival. "Look here. You never look at each other naturally. You always seem to be performing for an audience." The photographs were disturbingly revealing. Sarah could now see, with painful clarity, how their gestures seemed rehearsed, how their smiles were slightly forced, how even their displays of affection had a performative quality. "Moreover," Helen continued, pulling out more documents, "I did some checks. You never mentioned a relationship on your social media until December of last year. You were never seen with David outside of family or corporate contexts before that. And even more interesting, your address in the company records is still the apartment in Brooklyn, not the penthouse in Manhattan where David lives." Panic surged up Sarah's throat. Helen had conducted a detailed investigation, gathering evidence like a private detective. "And there's more." Helen smiled coldly. "Isabella told me that David confided in her during a dinner that he's considering ending the relationship, that he was pressured into a situation he now wants to escape." The last piece of information hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. Had David discussed his situation with Isabella? Had he admitted he wanted to end the pretense? "What do you want, Helen?" "I want to protect David from a scandal that could harm the company, and I want you to resign from your position voluntarily before I'm forced to take more drastic measures." "More drastic measures like what?" Helen leaned forward, her eyes shining with cold determination. "I have contacts in the business press, a story about an employee who faked a relationship with her boss for professional gain would be very damaging to your future career, don't you think?" Sarah understood the threat perfectly. Helen was not just protecting David, she was actively sabotaging any chance Sarah had to maintain her professional reputation. "I need time to think. You have until Friday to make a decision. 3 days. That night, Sarah came home emotionally exhausted to find Sophia lying on the sofa, still recovering from the flu. The girl wore a unicorn-patterned pajama and had a red nose from blowing it too much, but her dark eyes sparkled with joy at seeing her mother. "Mom, Grandma Johnson called. She said she wants to talk to you tomorrow about something important." Sarah felt she couldn't handle another family revelation at the moment. "Did she say what it was about?" "No, but she seemed kind of sad, and she asked if David could come too. David? Sarah frowned. Why would her mother want David present for a family conversation? Yeah, she said it has to do with the whole family. Mom, has something happened to David? It's been a while since he's been here. It was true. In the last 2 weeks, since the summer festival, David had kept a respectful distance. They still played the passionate couple in necessary situations, but there was a new formality in their interactions, a tension that Sophia had apparently noticed. It's just a tough phase at work, sweetheart. Are you guys going to break up? The question, Sophia's direct question, made Marina's heart tighten. Why do you ask that? Because you get sad when you talk about him now. And when he came to pick you up last week, he looked at you like he missed you, but he didn't come in to say hi, like he always does. Marina sat down next to her daughter on the sofa, once again impressed by the girl's perception. Sophia, if something happened between me and David, how would you feel? Sophia thought for a long moment, playing with the loose threads of the blanket covering her legs. I would be sad, she finally said. But, Mom, I noticed that you two sometimes seem to be pretending, like when we play house. But then the game ends. Marina felt the world spin around her. Sophia knew. Somehow, her 8-year-old daughter had realized that the relationship was a charade. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because you both seemed happy pretending, and Grandma has been much more cheerful since you started dating. I thought it might be a game that helped everyone. Marina hugged her daughter, feeling tears burning her eyes. Sophia had intuitively understood that the facade was meant to protect the family and had chosen to silently participate in the collective protection. You're very smart, you know? I know. But, Mum, if you two stop pretending, can David still be our friend? I really like him. On Friday, Marina was preparing to give her answer to Helen when she received an unexpected phone call. It was from St. Joseph's Hospital in Springfield. Her mother had been admitted again, this time with a more serious condition. Marina Johnson? I'm Dr. Patricia Smith, the cardiologist responsible for your mother's case. She had a severe arrhythmia episode overnight and needed to be intubated. Her condition is stable now, but we need to talk about her overall state. Marina rushed to the hospital, calling David on the way. To her surprise, he answered immediately and offered to meet her there without asking why she had called him in a family emergency. St. Joseph's Hospital was a modernized building trying to hide its age with glass facades and well-kept gardens. Marina arrived at the ICU on the 6th floor to find her mother connected to various machines, conscious but visibly weakened. Marina, my daughter, Mrs. Johnson whispered when she saw her. I'm glad you came. Mom, don't talk now. You need to rest. No, I need to talk. I might not have another chance. Mrs. Johnson weakly squeezed her daughter's hand. Where's David? He's coming. When David arrived at the hospital, Marina noticed he had left an important meeting. He was still in a suit and looked slightly out of breath, as if he had run through the halls. His presence brought unexpected relief to Marina, who until that moment had not realized how emotionally dependent she had become on his support. How is she? He asked softly, watching Mrs. Johnson through the glass of the ICU. Stable, but the doctor said that emotional stress has worsened her condition significantly. Each crisis is more serious than the last. And what do the doctors suggest? Drastic reduction of stress, psychological support, and... Marina hesitated. Family stability. They looked at each other, simultaneously understanding the cruel irony of the situation. The facade they had created to improve Mrs. Johnson's emotional state was now at risk of being exposed just when she needed stability the most. David, Marina said softly, I need to tell you about a conversation I had with Helen. She recounted the entire investigation, the threats, and the ultimatum. David listened in silence, his expression growing progressively darker. "Isabella said you want to end our situation," Marina finished. "I never said that to Isabella. In fact, I've been avoiding any personal conversation with her." David looked directly at her. "Marina, there's something I need to tell you about why I really agreed to do this." But before he could continue, the doctor approached with a serious expression. "Family members of Mrs. Johnson, we need to talk about her clinical condition and about a delicate matter she insisted on discussing in your presence." In the private room for family discussions, Dr. Patricia explained that Mrs. Johnson's condition had significantly deteriorated in recent months, and that emotional stress was the main complicating factor. "But there's something more," the doctor continued. "Your mother insisted that I speak with you about a matter she considers urgent, about family information she wants to share before any eventuality." "What kind of information?" Marina asked, feeling a chill in her stomach. "It would be better if she explains it herself, but I can say it involves issues of paternity and documents she has kept for many years." Marina looked at David, seeing her own confusion reflected in his golden eyes. Had her mother kept secrets about paternity for years? And why did she want David to be present for this revelation? "Can we see her now?" David asked. "For just a few minutes, but be prepared. She is very determined to tell something that has apparently been tormenting her for decades." As they walked back to the ICU, Marina realized that her life was about to change fundamentally once again, and David's presence by her side, even in a charade, had become the only constant amid the chaos that her existence had become. What her mother was about to reveal would change everything. She had that instinctive certainty, and part of her wondered if she was ready for yet another truth that could shake the foundations of everything she believed about her family and her own identity. The ICU at St. Joseph's Hospital had that characteristic smell of disinfectant mixed with the constant hum of medical equipment. Marina and David approached the bed where Mrs. Johnson lay, connected to monitors that they recorded every beat of her weakened heart. Despite her apparent physical fragility, her eyes held a determination that Sarah recognized. It was the same expression her mother had when making difficult yet necessary decisions. "Sarah, David, thank you for coming," Mrs. Johnson whispered, making a visible effort to speak clearly. "I need to tell you something I should have told you a long time ago." Sarah pulled a chair closer to the bed, while David stood beside her, his comforting presence palpable even amidst the growing tension in the air. "Mom, you don't have to force yourself right now. You can rest, and we can talk when you're feeling better." "No, Sarah, every crisis reminds me that I may not have infinite time." Mrs. Johnson took a deep breath, gathering her strength. "And after seeing you two together, pretending to be a couple to make us happy, I realized that our family was built on well-intentioned lies a long time ago." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean, Mom?" "Mr. Johnson is not your biological father, my daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. David instinctively placed his hand on her shoulder, offering physical support as she processed the revelation. "But how? I have a birth certificate, photos of when I was a baby with both of you." Mrs. Johnson smiled sadly. "Mr. Johnson met me when you were 6 months old. Your biological father. He disappeared when he found out I was pregnant. He left the country and never looked back." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. Her entire identity, her understanding of family and belonging, was being rewritten in that moment. Did Mr. Johnson know? He always knew. And yet he chose to be your father. He legally adopted you when you turned 2 and never, not once, treated you differently from a biological daughter. Tears streamed down Mrs. Johnson's face. That's why the divorce was so hard for him. He wasn't just losing a wife, he was losing the family he had chosen to build. David gently squeezed Sarah's shoulder, and she realized she was trembling. "Mom, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw you two pretending to be a couple, sacrificing your own happiness to give us hope. And I realized that I did the same thing for 28 years. I pretended our family was normal to protect all of you from the truth." Mrs. Johnson looked directly at David. "And because I want David to understand why you have such difficulty trusting people. You grew up feeling that something was hidden, something that didn't quite fit." Sarah finally found her voice. "Who is my biological father?" An Italian businessman who was in the United States temporarily, Anthony Bennett. He had a technology company working in software export. Mrs. Johnson hesitated. "Sarah, I know the name of his company because I tried to contact him a few times over the years, especially when you were in college, and I thought you might want to meet him." "Bennett Technologies," David said suddenly, his voice strange. All attention turned to him. Sarah saw a look of growing shock on his face. "You know this company?" Mrs. Johnson asked. "I do. They were our partners in Italy. Anthony Bennett mentored my company in its early years. He helped me establish international contracts." David looked at Sarah with an indescribable expression. "Sarah, I know your father." Mrs. Johnson's heart monitor began to beep more rapidly. Sarah felt as if she were living a surreal dream, where all the impossible connections in her life were being revealed simultaneously. You know my father?" Sarah managed to whisper. "I met him. He died 2 years ago. Cancer." David sat heavily in the other available chair. "Sarah, he always spoke about the United States with a strange melancholy. He said he left something important here, but never went into details." Mrs. Johnson began to cry silently. "He died? Anthony died?" "I'm so sorry," David said gently, "but there's something more. Before he died, he gave me some documents about investments in the United States. He said that if I ever found a woman named Mrs. Johnson or a girl named Sarah, I should deliver the documents to them." Sarah felt as if she were living in a surreal movie. "What documents?" "An investment fund he maintained in the United States all these years, with your name as the beneficiary." David looked directly at her. "Sarah, you are the heir to a technology company in Italy and a considerable investment fund here in the United States." The absurdity of the situation hit Sarah with full force. For months, she had pretended to be David's girlfriend to protect her family, and now she discovered that he knew her biological father, that she had an international inheritance, and that her entire life had been built on a well-intentioned lie. "I need air." Sarah stood up abruptly, feeling claustrophobic in the small space of the ICU. David followed her into the hospital corridor, where she leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. The corridor was filled with the typical hustle and bustle of hospitals, nurses passing by with equipment, worried families waiting for news, the echo of distant conversations mixed with the noise of elevators. "Sarah, I know it's a lot to process." "A lot to process?" Sarah laughed humorlessly. "David, my whole life is a lie. My father isn't my father. My biological father is dead. I have an inheritance I didn't know about, and you knew my father and never told me. I didn't know there was a connection. Anthony never mentioned full names, and you never talked about a missing Italian father." "Because I didn't know he existed." Sarah ran her hands through her hair, destroying the careful bun she had made that morning. "David, do you realize what this means? Our charade, our fake relationship, was orchestrated by fate or I don't know what." David approached carefully. "Sarah, there's something else I need to tell you, about why I really accepted pretend to be your boyfriend." Not now, David. I can't handle more revelations right now. It's important. It's about my childhood, about my mother. Before he could continue, a nurse appeared in the hallway with an urgent expression. "Family of Mrs. Johnson, please come quickly. Her condition has worsened." They rushed back to the ICU, where a medical team was working frantically around Mrs. Johnson's bed. The monitors emitted alarming sounds, and Sarah saw her mother being prepared for an emergency procedure. "What's happening?" Sarah asked desperately. "Severe atrial fibrillation. We need to take her to surgery immediately," Dr. Patricia explained quickly. The stress from the conversation may have triggered the crisis. As they wheeled Mrs. Johnson to the operating room, Sarah realized a cruel irony. The revelation of the truth, which was supposed to free her family from lies, had potentially caused a crisis that could cost her mother's life. In the waiting room, Sarah and David sat side by side in uncomfortable plastic chairs, surrounded by other families waiting for news of their loved ones. The silence between them was heavy, laden with unprocessed revelations and confusing emotions. "Sarah," David finally said, "I need to tell you about my mother before anything else happens." She looked at him, seeing a vulnerability in his eyes that she had never noticed before. "My mother's name was Eleanor Bennett." Sarah felt the world spin again. "Bennett? She was a cousin of Anthony. That's how I met him, through distant family ties. Sarah, when I offered to pretend to be your boyfriend, it wasn't just out of generosity. It was because I recognized in your voice on the phone the same desperation my mother had when she begged my father to come back. You are my cousin?" "Distant cousin, very distant. Elena was a second cousin of Anthony." David looked her directly in the eye. "But Sarah, there's more. Anthony told me, shortly before he died, that he had left a daughter in Brazil. He gave me money to invest here, saying that if I ever found her, I should take care of her like family." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. "You knew who I was from the beginning?" "I suspected from the first time you mentioned your mother's name was Mrs. Johnson, but I only became sure today when your mother confirmed his name." David took her hands. "Sarah, I didn't pretend a relationship with you. I pretended a relationship to get to you, to fulfill a promise I made to Anthony." The complexity of the situation was overwhelming. For months, Sarah had believed that David was helping a desperate employee. In reality, he was fulfilling a family promise, taking care of a distant relative who didn't even know of her existence. "So everything was a lie," she whispered. "Not everything." David squeezed her hands. "The feelings I developed for you and for Sophia are real. The way I started to care for your family is real. Sarah, I may have started this out of obligation, but now I can't imagine my life without you." Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Patricia appeared. In the waiting room, still wearing her surgical gown, her expression was carefully neutral, giving little away about the outcome of the procedure. "The surgery was successful. We managed to stabilize her heart rhythm. But," the doctor hesitated, "she insisted on sending a message to you before the anesthesia." "What message?" Sarah asked. "She said, 'Tell them to stop pretending they don't love each other. Life is too short to waste true love over lies that no longer matter.'" Sarah looked at David, seeing her own confusing emotions reflected in his golden eyes. Her mother, even in critical condition, had perceived something they were still struggling to admit, that at some point, during those months of pretense, real feelings had blossomed between them. But now, with all the revelations about family, heritage, and past connections, Sarah wondered if she would ever be able to distinguish between what was real and what had been built on the fragile foundations of well-intentioned lies. The only certainty she had was that her life had changed irrevocably that afternoon in the hospital, and that the man sitting next to her was no longer just her boss, pretending to be her boyfriend. He was something much more complex, dangerous, and potentially devastating to her already fragile heart. July arrived with the typical cold of winter in New York, bringing with it chilly mornings covered by a fine drizzle that fogged the windows of Wall Street buildings and created a melancholic atmosphere that perfectly mirrored Sarah's emotional state. 2 weeks had passed since the revelations at the hospital, and Mrs. Johnson was slowly recovering at home, under constant medical care, and with Sophia frequently sleeping at her grandparents' house to help with supervision. The relationship between Sarah and David had entered a strange zone. They still maintained the public appearances of a couple, but there was a new tension between them, a sharp awareness that all the foundations of their connection had been redefined by the discoveries about their intertwined family histories. In the office, Isabella had intensified her destabilization campaign. During a meeting with international investors on a grey Tuesday morning, she publicly questioned David's emotional stability to lead the company during periods of personal turbulence. "I understand that family issues are important," Isabella said, her melodious voice echoing in the conference room on the 25th floor. "But we need to consider the impact that complex relationships in the workplace can have on our operations and our corporate reputation." Sarah was present at the meeting as an administrative assistant, taking minutes, but felt all eyes discreetly turn to her when Isabella made the comment. The investors, 3 serious men in dark suits and an elegant middle-aged woman, seemed interested in the insinuation. "What kind of complexity are you referring to, Isabella?" asked Mr. Hamilton, one of the main investors. Marina Santos looked at her colleagues. "Well, there are rumors about internal relationships, family issues that may create conflicts of interest, and some irregularities in recent promotions." Isabella looked directly at Sarah Johnson before continuing. "As shareholders, you have the right to question whether leadership is making decisions based on professional merit or personal influences." David maintained his composure, but Sarah noticed the growing tension in his posture. "Isabella, if you have specific concerns about corporate management, we can discuss them in an appropriate forum. This meeting is about the second quarter financial results." "Of course," Isabella smiled, but there was triumph in her eyes. "I just think it's important for our partners to understand the full picture before making investment decisions." After the meeting, Sarah retreated to the women's restroom on the floor, trying to control the mix of anger and humiliation burning in her chest. Isabella had skillfully planted seeds of doubt in the minds of the investors without making direct accusations, a tactic that was simultaneously devastating and hard to confront. She was touching up her lipstick when the door opened, and Isabella entered, checking her appearance in the mirror with the ease of someone completely comfortable with her own beauty. "Sarah, can we talk?" Isabella applied a light gloss to her lips as she spoke, woman to woman. "About what?" "About David, about his future, and about how you might be inadvertently harming both of you." Isabella turned to face her directly. "You seem like a good person, hard-working, dedicated, obviously concerned about your family. But do you really think you are the best partner for someone like David?" Sarah felt her blood boil. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about practical realities. David needs a partner who complements his social and professional standing, someone who can accompany him to dinners with international investors, who understands the complexities of the corporate world, who has the sophistication necessary to represent the company at important events." Isabella spoke with a condescending tone that made Sarah feel small. "You are a single mother, an administrative assistant, without formal education in business or international experience. How does that help his career?" "David doesn't see me as a professional accessory." "No?" Then why did he confide in me that he is considering ending the relationship? Why did he say he feels pressured by a situation that started as a favor and now he doesn't know how to end it? Each word from Isabella was like a knife. Sarah tried to maintain her composure, but she felt her emotional defenses crumbling. Moreover, Isabella continued, applying a layer of powder, there's the issue of inheritance. Do you really think it's a coincidence that David offered help right before finding out that you are the heiress of Anthony Bennett? Men like David don't do anything without calculating the benefits. You are lying. I'm being realistic. Sarah, you genuinely seem to care about David. If you truly love him, you should want what's best for him. And what's best is not a relationship that harms his professional reputation and limits his future opportunities. Isabella finished her makeup, put her cosmetics away in her expensive bag, and headed for the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time. There's a merger proposal with a European company on the table. It would be David's career opportunity to expand internationally. But they are very conservative about family matters. A CEO with a controversial relationship would be problematic. She smiled coldly. Just something for you to consider. Alone in the restroom, Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and saw a 32-year-old woman who seemed to have aged years in just a few months. The emotional costs of the facade, combined with family revelations and now Isabella's manipulations, were clearly visible in her tired features. That afternoon, an unexpected crisis completely changed the course of events. Sophia, who was spending a few days at her grandparents' house to help take care of Mrs. Johnson, began to feel severe abdominal pain during lunch. Mr. Johnson called Sarah in a panic. "Sarah, Sophia is in a lot of pain. Mrs. Johnson thinks it might be appendicitis. We're taking her to the emergency room now." Sarah felt the world collapse. She rushed to the hospital, calling David on the way without even thinking if it was appropriate to involve him in a real family crisis. "Sarah, what happened?" The concern in his voice was genuine and immediate. "It's Sophia. It might be appendicitis. I'm heading to the hospital." "Which hospital? I'm coming too." "David, you don't need to." "Sarah, I'm coming. Send me the location." At the children's hospital, Sarah found Sophia on a stretcher in the emergency room, pale but conscious, holding Mrs. Johnson's hand, who had insisted on accompanying her despite her own fragile health condition. Mr. Johnson was nervously pacing in the waiting room, his hands trembling slightly, a sign of stress that Sarah recognized from the time of the divorce. "Mom, it hurts a lot," Sophia whispered when she saw Sarah approaching. "I know, sweetheart. The doctors will take care of you." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, feeling the warmth of a low fever. Dr. Philip Smith, the pediatric surgeon responsible for the case, explained that Sophia would need emergency surgery to remove the inflamed appendix. The procedure was routine, but still carried the inherent risks of any surgery. "Does the health plan cover everything completely?" Sarah asked, although she knew that her basic coverage might not include all the costs of a specialized surgery. "There are some coverage issues," the financial attendant admitted. "For this type of urgent surgery, with the specific surgeon available and the type of anesthesia needed, there is a difference of approximately $15,000 that is not covered." Sarah felt panic rise in her throat. She didn't have $15,000 available. She could try for a loan, but that would take days, and Sophia needed the surgery immediately. "I'll pay the difference," David said, appearing at the reception, still wearing the suit from the previous meeting, but with his tie loosened and a genuinely worried expression. "David, I can't accept." "Sarah, this is not the time for pride. Sophia needs the surgery now." He was already handing over the credit card to the attendant. Sarah said, "But it's $15,000. "Sarah, Sophia is practically my daughter now too. Would you let my daughter go through this out of pride?" The way he said "my daughter," made Sarah's heart tighten. During the months of pretense, David had genuinely become a father figure to Sophia, and now he was showing it in a concrete way. During the 2 hours of surgery, Sarah, David, Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Johnson waited in the family waiting room. The tension was palpable, but there was something deeply touching about how they had come together as a family during the crisis. "David," Mr. Johnson said during one of the long pauses of silence, "I want to thank you, not just for paying for the surgery, but for taking care of my girls." Sarah saw David hesitate before responding. "Mr. Johnson, there's something I need to tell you about my relationship with Sarah." "You don't need to say anything, son," Mrs. Johnson said gently, despite her own exhaustion. "I always knew you were pretending at first, but I also know that now it's real." "How do you know?" Sarah asked. "Because no man pays $15,000 for a child who isn't truly his family. And because you look at each other now like two people who love each other but are afraid to admit it." It was at that moment that Dr. Philip appeared in the waiting room, still wearing surgical scrubs, but with a reassuring smile. "The surgery went perfectly. Sophia is fine, waking up from anesthesia and asking for her mother." The relief Sarah felt was so intense that her legs almost gave out. David caught her, and for the first time in months, she allowed him to embrace her completely without thinking about performance or appearances. In the recovery room, Sophia was drowsy but awake, connected to some monitors, but clearly out of danger. When she saw Sarah and David enter together, she smiled weakly. "Did you stop pretending that you like each other?" she asked, with the brutal honesty of children. Sarah and David looked at each other, realizing that Sophia had observed their interactions with more insight than they had imagined. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. "Because now you're holding on to each other like you're afraid of getting lost. Just like Mariana's parents at school, who fought and then made up." David chuckled softly. "Your daughter is very smart, Sarah." "I know. She always has been." "Sarah," Sophia took her mother's hand, "can you stop being afraid of really liking David? He's nice, and he really likes us too." In that moment, in the hospital room with the smell of disinfectant and the soft noise of the monitors, Sarah finally understood that her 8-year-old daughter had grasped something she herself struggled to accept, that at some point during those months of pretense, genuine feelings had developed between her and David. "Sophia," David approached the bed, "can I tell you a secret?" "Sure." "I really fell in love with your mother, and with you too, and now I don't know how to pretend it's not real." Sophia smiled, her eyes shining despite the post-surgery fatigue. "Then stop pretending. Be real boyfriend and girlfriend." Sarah looked at David, seeing vulnerability and hope mixed in his golden eyes. All the complications, all of Isabella's manipulations, all the questions about inheritance and family seemed secondary in light of Sophia's simple observation. Maybe it was time to stop protecting herself and start living for real. "David," she said softly, "maybe we should talk about what we really want." "Maybe we should," he agreed, smiling in a way that made her heart race. As Sophia drifted off to sleep peacefully, Sarah realized that the medical crisis had clarified something fundamental. David was no longer there out of obligation, inheritance, or promises made to his father. He was there because he had chosen to be part of her family for real. Now it remained to be seen if she had the courage to make the same choice. August arrived with the end of the winter in Springfield, and the first yellow ipe flowers starting to color the city's avenues, bringing with it a sense of renewal that contrasted with the growing tension in the Tech Innovations office. Sophia had fully recovered from the surgery, smarter and more observant than ever, while Mrs. Johnson had gradually resumed her activities, showing significant improvement in her health since the truth about the family had finally come to light. Sarah arrived at work on a sunny Monday in August to find Helen waiting at her desk with a triumphant expression that did not bode well. Next to her was a well-dressed middle-aged man whom Sarah did not recognize. Impeccably tailored suit, neatly cut grey hair, and a posture that radiated corporate authority. "Sarah, this is Dr. Richard Moore, chairman of the board at Tech Innovations." Helen introduced him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He would like to speak with you." The meeting room was more formal than usual. Dr. Moore had brought a folder of documents, and Helen had an open tablet with what were clearly prepared notes. Sarah sat in the indicated chair, feeling like a defendant before a corporate tribunal. "Ms. Johnson," Dr. Moore began, his voice polite but firm, "the board has received some concerns regarding irregularities in this company's professional relationships, specifically about an inappropriate relationship between an employee and her direct superior that may have influenced promotion decisions and resource allocation." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Dr. Moore, I can assure you that—" "Furthermore," he continued, ignoring her attempt to respond, "there are questions about conflicts of interest involving family inheritances and possible manipulations for personal gain." Helen leaned forward, opening the tablet. "Sarah, we have evidence that your relationship with David started as a pretense for personal benefits, evolved into a situation that compromises the professional integrity of the company, and now involves complex financial issues related to an Italian inheritance." "How do you know about the inheritance?" Dr. Smith flipped through some documents. "Ms. Watson informed us about certain coincidences. A relationship that began exactly during the period when discoveries about financially advantageous family connections came to light." Sarah immediately understood what had happened. Isabella had compiled all the information: the fake relationship, the family connections with Anthony Bennett, the inheritance, and presented it to the board as evidence of manipulation and exploitation. "Dr. Smith, I can explain." "Ms. Johnson, the board has decided that the best course of action for all parties involved would be your transfer to our branch in Washington, D.C., an equivalent position, same salary, but an appropriate distance from the current complications." A transfer to Washington, D.C. meant leaving New York City, leaving her family, leaving the life she had built. It meant separating Sophia from the grandparents she adored, just when the family had finally found stability after years of turmoil. "What if I refuse the transfer?" Helen and Dr. Smith exchanged a meaningful glance. "Well, in that case, we would have to consider other alternatives. The board is very concerned about the company's reputation." The threat was clear: accept the transfer or be fired. Sarah realized that Isabella had orchestrated a systematic attack that made her continued employment at the company unsustainable, regardless of her choices. "I need time to think." "Of course, you have until Thursday to make a decision." That afternoon, Sarah was organizing her personal documents when David appeared at her desk, visibly agitated. He was wearing a slightly wrinkled white dress shirt and had loosened his tie, signs that he had had a particularly stressful day. "Sarah, what the hell is going on? I heard the board talk to you about a transfer." "They want to send me to Washington, D.C., she said without looking up from the papers, "because of the irregularities in our relationship and the issues regarding the inheritance." David sat on the edge of her desk, lowering his voice. "Sarah, don't let them force you out. I can fix this." "How?" "David, you don't understand. Isabella gathered evidence, made it seem like I got close to you for financial gain. She turned our story into a narrative of manipulation and exploitation. Then let's tell the truth. What truth? Sarah finally looked at him. That we started pretending to be in a relationship to deceive my family. That you helped me because you promised my biological father you would take care of me. That I inherited a fortune I knew nothing about. How does that sound less manipulative? David was silent for a moment, clearly realizing the complexity of the situation they had created. Sarah, what? If I resign from my position, if I leave the company, the conflict of interest issues disappear. Are you crazy? This is your company, David. You built all of this. And none of it matters if I lose you and Sophia. The intensity in his voice made Sarah stop organizing the papers and look directly at him. There was something in his golden eyes that she had never seen before. Total vulnerability. A real fear of loss. David, Sarah, I need to tell you something I should have said weeks ago, when I offered to pretend to be your boyfriend. It wasn't just because of the promise I made to Anthony. It was because the moment I heard your desperate voice on the phone, I fell in love. You fell in love with my voice on the phone. I fell in love with your humanity. The way you sacrifice for your family, how you protect the people you love, even if it harms you. I fell in love with the devoted mother raising a brilliant daughter alone, with the competent employee who never uses personal charm to gain advantages, with the woman who prefers to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders rather than ask for help. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. David, you can't resign. And I can't stay if it harms your company. So, what do we do? Before Sarah could respond, Sophia appeared in the office, accompanied by Mr. Johnson, who had come to pick her up from school. The girl ran towards Sarah's desk, but stopped abruptly upon sensing the tension in the air. "Are you guys fighting again?" she asked, with the keen perception that children have for detecting adult problems. "We're not fighting, sweetheart." Sarah knelt to be at her daughter's height. "Just talking about work." "About you having to leave?" Sophia asked directly. Sarah and David exchanged surprised glances. "How do you know that?" "Because you were crying on the phone with Grandma last night. And because you're organizing your things like you did when we moved from the old apartment." Mr. Johnson approached, greeting David with a nod. "Sarah, Mrs. Johnson told me about the situation. Are you going to accept the transfer?" "I don't know, Dad. It's complicated." Sophia looked from Sarah to David, then back to Sarah. "Mom, do you love David?" The direct question made all the adults fall silent. Sarah felt she was being watched by 3 pairs of eyes, waiting for an honest answer. "Sophia, it's not that simple." "It is. Do you love him or not?" Sarah looked at David, seeing hope and fear mixed in his expression. "Yes," she finally said. "I love him." "And you, David? Do you love my mom and want to be my real dad?" David knelt beside Sarah, getting to Sophia's level. "I love your mom more than I thought I could love someone. And I already consider you my daughter, Sophia. Nothing would change that." Sophia nodded with the seriousness of an adult making an important decision. "Then you guys are going to get married, and we're going to be a real family, and you're going to stop letting other people interfere with our happiness." The simplicity of Sophia's logic cut through all the adult complications. Mr. Johnson chuckled softly. "The girl is right. Sometimes kids see things more clearly than adults." At that moment, Helen appeared in the department with a triumphant expression. "Sarah, Dr. Miller would like a response about the transfer by the end of today, not Thursday. There has been a change in deadlines." "Why the rush?" David asked, his voice hardening. "Operational issues," Helen replied evasively. It was then that Isabella appeared, elegant as always in a beige blazer and pencil skirt, carrying a portfolio of documents. "David, we need to talk about the merger proposal. The European investors are waiting for a final decision." "What merger proposal?" Sarah asked. Isabella smiled coldly. "Did you not tell her? an incredible opportunity for international expansion. Of course, it requires some reorganizations in the current company structure. Sarah immediately understood. The urgency to resolve her situation was related to the merger proposal Isabella had mentioned weeks before, a merger that would be jeopardized by the presence of a controversial relationship in the company's leadership. David, Isabella continued, the investors are very conservative about personal matters. They made it clear that they need assurances about the stability of the leadership before proceeding. What kind of assurances? Mr. Johnson asked, his business experience allowing him to read between the lines of the conversation. Assurances that there will be no scandals, conflicts of interest, or situations that could harm the corporate reputation internationally, Isabella explained, looking directly at Sarah. Sophia, who had been observing the entire interaction attentively, suddenly spoke up. You're the villain in the story, aren't you? What? Isabella seemed genuinely surprised by the child's direct observation. In the stories that Mommy reads to me, there's always a villainess who wants to separate the happy people. You're her. The silence that followed was deeply uncomfortable. Helen tried to laugh off the comment, but Mr. Johnson and David seemed to be processing the simple truth that Sophia had expressed. Sophia, you shouldn't speak to adults that way, Sarah gently reprimanded, but there was a note of pride in her voice. But it's true. Mom, she wants you to leave so she can be with David, just like in the Snow White story. Isabella blushed slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the child's insight. Well, I don't think this is an appropriate conversation for children. On the contrary, David said suddenly, his voice filled with the determination that Sarah had never heard before. I think Sophia's right. It's time to stop letting others dictate our happiness. He turned to Sarah, taking her hands. Sarah, marry me. What? The surprise in her voice echoed the feelings of everyone present. Marry me, now, today. Let's go to the courthouse, sign the papers, and put an end to all this manipulation once and for all. David, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. He knelt right there in the middle of the office, in front of Helen, Isabella, Mr. Johnson, and Sophia. Sarah Johnson, will you marry me? Today, now, in front of everyone who's trying to separate us? Sophia began to jump for joy. Say yes, Mom. Say yes. Mr. Johnson smiled, clearly approving of David's decisive action. The courthouse is open until 5 if you hurry. Sarah looked around, at David kneeling before her, at Sophia radiating happiness, at Mr. Johnson smiling for the first time in months, at Helen and Isabella clearly shocked by the turn of events. Sarah, David said softly, I know we started all this as a lie, but now it's the truest thing in my life. Marry me because you love me, not because you need to solve corporate problems. And the merger? And the conservative investors? To hell with that. I'm not choosing money over family. Sarah felt all her emotional defenses finally crumble. For months, she had protected herself, calculated risks, tried to control variables. But there, in the face of David's impulsive and completely romantic proposal, she realized that overprotection had become a prison. Yes, she said, her voice growing in certainty and volume. Yes, I will marry you. Today, now, in front of everyone. Sophia screamed with joy. Mr. Johnson laughed and applauded, and even some employees who had gathered to watch the drama spontaneously applauded. Isabella and Helen seemed to have completely lost control of the situation they had tried to orchestrate. But you can't just, Helen began. Yes, we can, Mr. Johnson said firmly, and we will. Sophia, call Grandma and tell her to get ready. Today is wedding day for the family. As everyone prepared to rush to the courthouse, Sarah realized that the third major twist in her story had not been caused by external manipulations or revelations from the past. but by the courageous decision to finally choose love over fear. The charade was over. Real life was just beginning. 8 months had passed since that first Christmas dinner in Springfield, and Sarah was standing in the kitchen of her new home in Manhattan, preparing Sunday morning coffee while watching the first golden rays of autumn sunlight illuminate the small garden that David had insisted on including in the property so Sophia could plant her flowers. The house was a modern 3-bedroom townhouse with a gourmet area opening to the garden and an office where David worked on weekends. It wasn't a mansion, but it was perfect for a family that had learned to value simplicity and authenticity over appearances. Sophia appeared in the kitchen still in her pajamas, her brown hair tousled from sleep, carrying a drawing she had made the day before. Now 9 years old, she had grown a few inches and gained a newfound confidence that came from finally having a stable and complete family. "Mum, look what I drew for Dad," she said, naturally using the word Dad to refer to David, as she had since the wedding. "It's our family on Mother's Day." Sarah smiled at the drawing. 4 stick figures smiling under a bright yellow sun, with a 5th. A smaller figure clearly represented the baby growing in her 5-month pregnancy. "It's beautiful, love. Daddy will love it." "Where is he?" "He went to pick up Grandma Johnson and Grandpa Johnson for lunch. They should be here soon." The family dynamic had completely transformed since the wedding. Mr. Johnson had moved back to the house in Springfield to care for Mrs. Johnson, who now had her diabetes under control and had resumed her social activities in the community. The couple had not reconciled romantically, but had developed a mature friendship based on mutual care and their shared love for Sarah and Sophia. The phone rang, and Sarah answered, expecting to hear David's voice. But it was Helen. "Sarah, it's me, Helen. Sorry to bother you on a Sunday, but I needed to share some news." In the months following the wedding, the relationship between Sarah and Helen had undergone a surprising transformation. After David made it clear that his attempts at sabotage were unacceptable, Helen had gradually recognized that her excessive loyalty had become destructive. Over time, she learned to respect Sarah not as a threat, but as a partner who genuinely made David happy. "What happened, Helen?" "Isabella resigned yesterday. She accepted an offer to coordinate a branch of an American company in Europe. She's leaving next week." Sarah felt a mix of relief and melancholy. Isabella had never come to terms with David's marriage, and her presence in the company had remained a constant source of tension, albeit more subtle than before. "And how is David handling it?" "Better than we expected. He said it's time to focus on the people who genuinely want to be here for the right reasons." After the wedding, Tech Innovations had undergone significant changes. The merger proposal with the European company had been rejected when it became clear that it would require ethical and personal compromises that David was unwilling to make. Instead, he chose a more organic growth strategy, prioritizing quality over aggressive expansion. Sarah had accepted the promotion to Special Projects Coordinator, quickly proving that her professional competence was independent of any personal relationship. She now led a team of 6 and had implemented social responsibility programs that became a model for other companies in the industry. "Helen," Sarah said, "thank you for calling, and thank you for everything, for learning to support us. Thank you for being patient with me. I was wrong about many things." After hanging up, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, feeling the first movements of the baby in her belly. The pregnancy had been a wonderful surprise, discovered 2 weeks after their honeymoon, spent in a cozy cabin in the mountains, away from all the corporate and family drama. David arrived home carrying shopping bags and accompanied by his adoptive parents, who were now officially his in-laws. The transformation in Mr. Johnson was remarkable. He wore a light dress shirt and jeans, had cut his hair, and seemed to have regained the interest in life he had lost during the marital crisis. "Sarah, my daughter!" Mrs. Johnson warmly embraced her, her hands immediately going to Sarah's belly. "How is my grandbaby?" "Growing well, kicking a lot too. Just like his mother when she was in the belly," Mr. Johnson laughed. "Sarah didn't let me sleep properly in the last trimester." It was the first time Mr. Johnson openly referred to Sarah's early years as his daughter, and Sarah felt a deep emotion, realizing he had finally found peace with his complex family history. David approached, kissing Sarah and placing his hand on her belly in a gesture that had become a loving routine. "How are you two feeling?" "3," Sophia corrected, pointing to the belly. "There are 3 girls now." "It's a boy," Sarah laughed. "The ultrasound confirmed it last week." "So there are 3 special people for Daddy to and take care of," Sophia rephrased with the flexible logic of children. During lunch in the gourmet area, with the aroma of roasted ribs mingling with the scent of flowers Sophia had planted in the garden, the conversation naturally shifted to future plans and recent memories. "Do you remember the first Christmas dinner that David came over to our house?" Mrs. Johnson asked, serving stuffing with bacon. "I knew you were pretending, but I also knew something special was happening." "How did you know?" David asked, curious. "Because you looked at each other like 2 people discovering something important about themselves. You were pretending to be a couple, but you were actually falling in love without realizing it." Sarah and David exchanged a look filled with shared memories, all the well-intentioned lies, the complications, the fears, and finally the courage to choose truth and love. "And now," Sophia asked, "now you don't have to pretend anymore." "Now we are a real family," David replied, covering Sophia's hand with his. "No more pretending, just true love. And the baby will know from the start that he has a family that truly loves him," Sophia insisted, always concerned about the emotional coherence of the adults around her. "He will know," Sarah promised. "He will grow up knowing that sometimes families are formed in unexpected ways. But what matters is the love we choose to share." That afternoon, after Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Johnson returned home, Sarah found David in the office, working on financial reports. She approached from behind and massaged his tense shoulders, feeling the comfortable familiarity of an intimacy gradually built over the months. "David, can I ask you a question?" "Always." "Do you have any regrets about how everything happened, about the decisions we made?" David saved the document, turned the chair to face her, and pulled her to sit on his lap, a careful move considering her growing belly. "My only regret," he said, kissing her forehead, "is taking so long. To admit that he was truly in love. If he could turn back time, he would have proposed on the first day he pretended to be her boyfriend, even knowing all the complications, the inheritance, the family connections, the issues at the company. Especially because of the complications. They brought us here." David placed his hand on her belly, feeling a strong kick from the baby. "This little one. Here is proof that even stories that start with lies can have true endings." Sarah snuggled against him, feeling a deep peace that had replaced years of anxiety and self-protection. "Do you think Sophia will be a good big sister?" "She will be the best. She's already planning to teach him soccer and explain why her parents are the most special in the world." That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Sarah and David sat in the small but carefully tended garden, watching the stars that were visible even with the city lights. Sarah wore a light maternity dress, and David had changed out of formal clothes into shorts and a t-shirt. "Sarah," David suddenly said, "there's something I want to give you." He disappeared into the house and returned carrying an old yellowed cardboard box. "What is this?" Letters that Anthony wrote to you and your mother all these years, but never had the courage to send. He gave them to me before he died, saying that if I ever found you, I should deliver them. Sarah opened the box with trembling hands, finding dozens of handwritten letters in Italian and English, some with old photos attached. There were birthday letters for every year she had lived, Christmas letters, letters for special occasions he had imagined but never witnessed. He followed your life from afar all these years, David explained gently. He had a private investigator who sent annual reports about you and your mother. He knew about your grades in school, your graduation, your first job, Sophia's birth. Sarah held a letter dated the year Sophia was born, her tears slightly smudging the ink. He knew I had a daughter. He did, and he left a savings account for her education too. Why didn't you ever tell me this before? Because I wanted to be sure you loved me for who I am, not because of connections to your father or financial issues. David took her hands. Now I know our love is real, regardless of all that. Sarah embraced David there in the small but perfect garden, surrounded by the flowers Sophia had planted, and the letters from a father she had never known, but who had loved her from afar her entire life. David, Thank you for pretending to be my boyfriend that first Christmas. Why? Because by pretending to be happy, we discovered how to be truly happy. They sat in comfortable silence, Sarah reading excerpts from her father's letters, while David caressed her belly, feeling the movements of the son who would be born in a few months into a family that had learned that true love can arise from the most unlikely situations. The jasmine scent from the garden mixed with Sarah's soft perfume, and the distant sound of New York City's traffic created an urban soundtrack for their simple and genuine happiness. 8 months after that desperate Christmas Eve, when everything had begun, Sarah finally understood that the best love stories are those that start with people pretending to be happy and end with people who have discovered how to be truly happy. Sophia appeared at the kitchen door, sleepy and carrying her teddy bear. "Mom, Dad, why are you still awake?" "Just talking, sweetheart," Sarah smiled. "About the baby." "About our family," David replied. Sophia approached and snuggled between them on the garden bench. "Our family is the best in the world, right?" "It is," Sarah agreed, kissing the top of her daughter's head. "The best in the world," as the 3 people she loved most settled beside her under the starry New York City sky. David realized he had found something he never knew he was searching for. An imperfect, complicated family, formed by lies turned into truths, but absolutely real in their love. And in that small garden in Manhattan, surrounded by the scent of jasmine and the gentle sound of the breaths of the people he loved, he finally understood that the best happy endings are not those that happen without complications, but those that happen despite all the complications. The story that began with a desperate lie had transformed into the most beautiful truth of their lives.